Today's podcast is about writing the introduction. The introduction leads us to that one sentence answer to the question or essay task, and along the way gives us a roadmap that directs the reader where you are going with that answer. In an introduction, we often find that the ideas that start out in our introduction are very broad, but as they go down through the introduction, there is a tendency to narrow, just like a funnel, to reach that thesis. This outline starts to allow you to map out your introduction for your essay task. Now, after you have read through the essay task and you discover what it's asking you to do, you need to form an argument or a claim, and oftentimes we refer to that as your thesis. Generally, the thesis goes at the end of your introduction. So how do we start it? Remember, the purpose of an introduction is to tell the reader what it is you're going to actually be writing about in the rest of the essay. So we need to get that reader hooked. We have to get him interested enough to read on. And that's the BAM statement, or the hook, that starts out the introduction paragraph. Of course, it should direct us toward our thesis, but it should be something that the reader will find interesting. Sometimes writers will use a quote or a blanket statement that is so far-reaching that you have to find out more. After you throw in that zinger and hook the reader, it's time to start leading them on the directions with the roadmap. Again, this is not a place for you to add a whole bunch of evidence or explain why. That goes on in the rest of the essay. But in the introduction, you need to give us some direction on how you plan to get to your thesis, how you plan to prove it. And so, the next 2 or 3 sentences in that introduction paragraph should be explaining what you're going to write about. Oftentimes, this is where you introduce to the reader the who, the what, the when, and the where. You've looked at the task, and you've discovered that it's asking you to prove something. You decide what you're going to prove. That's your thesis. But how are you going to actually prove it? That's your roadmap. So give us the hints along the way. Now, this introduction paragraph is only going to be 3 to 5 sentences long, somewhere around the 50 words in length. And as I mentioned, you are going to have most likely an introduction of who, what, when, and where, although not a lot of description. And this is also a great place to add any key terms that will help us understand where we're going with this essay. And then finally, as everything in this paragraph should focus attention on the thesis, that's where we end our introduction. This is your argument, your claim, and your purpose to the essay. What are you going to prove? Ultimately, if you've hooked a reader and gotten them interested, and you've staked a claim that you're going to make an argument about in this essay, and you've hinted at directions that will lead us to the treasure, that thesis, and proving it. And along the way, in that introduction, you've set the tone of what you are going to say in the rest of your essay.